guys, this should show some interest. This truck has 260,000 miles, 4.3, it's a 2010. Focus. And as you can see, the electrode is burnt clean off. The truck was not skipping. It wasn't running great, but it was not skipping. This is what a new spark plug looks like. Still don't want to focus. Anyway, you get the point. Really huge difference. There's only supposed to be a 60 thousandths gap between the tip and the center electrode. Spark plug wires have never been touched. Let's see the other keys. Just so you know, I'm not full of it. This used to be my company truck when I worked for an electrical company in Asheville, North Carolina. I won't say the name for whatever potential legal purposes. Not that there would be. But I drove this thing for many moons. Let's see. Odometer. 260,219. As you can see, I wasn't full of it. I rebuilt the transmission. Trans temp, let's go back to that. There we go. I rebuilt the trans right at 260 because it didn't have third or fourth gear. Replaced an O2 sensor, cleared the codes, changed the oil. What else have I done? Air filter. Now I'm doing plugs, plug wires, intake gaskets. Oh yeah, I fixed the cooler line, or the return line for the power steering. It had rusted through that metal line. Same thing happened to the transmission cooler, which is what got the transmission right before I bought it. The maintenance fellow at that company said that the fellows were driving it down the road and it just blew a line, so it was in high gear when it lost all of its fluid, which, if you know anything about transmissions, it's hydraulic. If it loses all of its fluid, it loses pressure and then everything starts slipping. It overheats, it boiled it. There's no telling how hard those guys pushed it, considering how old the truck is. Even though it's in good shape, they probably pushed it way past what they should have, instead of just, pulling over and calling for help. They probably revved it a few times as it didn't have a gear, because it completely lost high gear immediately after they fixed the line, and they were driving it back from the shop and it lost high gear. Burnt the direct clutch drum up. Replaced all the sensors in the transmission, not sensors, excuse me, the solenoids. And I'm actually going to go back in and do a shift kit to improve the lockup converter, which the one I'm doing actually deletes the slip in the lockup. It's either on or it's off, mainly because these valve bodies, they shutter when it's doing that. The actual valve inside the valve body shutters, and it just wears the bore completely out. And I just bought a Sonex upgrade kit, and it's either on or off, and it'll stop the fluid leakage so it won't burn high gear up again, or it won't burn the torque converter up either, because that causes torque converter failure because it just gets so hot. Added the transmission cooler. I don't know if you can see it through the grill back there. It's considerably larger than stock. I mean, it's a big one. And it immediately dropped the trans temps. After I rebuilt it, it dropped the trans temps 20 degrees going down the road. This truck has electric fans, so it doesn't have a fan that runs all the time with the engine. So it tends to get a little hotter. So my suggestion is always to add a trans cooler to the return line from the original. So run it through the original trans cooler in the radiator, and then the return side of that, which is usually the closest line either to the bottom or the one closest to the outlet. Well, it would actually be the inlet going to the water pump, because that's what's coming in the top is the hot. What's going back in the water pump is the cooler fluid from the radiator. So whichever line's closest to the return back to the water pump off the radiator, that's the cooler line you want to take out to your new cooler. Therefore, it's already cooled a little bit, so you're not returning hot or cool fluid into a hot radiator. You're actually sending what's warm out to the new cooler, which actually does a better job than the other one. It'll reduce the temperatures even more. And then on the bottom of that, because heat rises, common sense here, so you want to take the line from the radiator to the top of the cooler, wherever you mount it, in front of the radiator preferably, because you need as much air exposure as possible. And then the one out of the bottom, because cold tends to settle down, correct? And then that goes back to the transmission. So, I mean, it was an immediate 20-degree change, and that's huge, especially if you're sitting around idling in traffic. The cooling system on these things doesn't kick the fans on unless you're running air conditioning. It does not kick the fans on until it gets up to like 225, and then it shuts back off at like, I'd have to go into the book and look, but I think it's 208 or 210, so it runs really hot. Transmissions really don't function well above 205, 210 degrees, and if you're sitting in traffic, it's going to get hotter than that. It's amazing that these things last as long as they do, guys. So, little preventative maintenance. It's got 260,000 miles on the original transmission, the original spark plugs. I did do a belt tensioner, idler pulley, new belt. Water pump seems to be in good shape. I haven't noticed any puddles or leaking. It's not the original water pump, but it's been a long time since that thing's been changed. So, yeah, I haven't seen any noticeable evidence, but it's probably going to need a water pump soon. But I'm actually going to sell it, so if it doesn't leak before I get rid of it, then it'll just have to stay in there. Somebody else can deal with it. But the downstream O2 sensor on the passenger side is generally the one that goes bad first, and then the rest will follow. I just replaced at 260,000 miles, and I can promise you, I know the maintenance of this truck because I drove it most of its life, that it never had anything done but oil changes, but they were religious about keeping the oil changed every 5,000 or less. So this thing has had oil change religiously, and it's only been driven on the interstate. It's not been out four-wheeling in the mud. Of course, it's only a two-wheel drive anyway. Air conditioning this thing is still ice cold, and it's never been touched. Never. It's amazing what this truck has done. Anyway, we have idiots at Oil Well. Nothing against Oil Well as a company personally, but as you can see, all the bolts are stripped on the airbox, and it has an oversized oil drain plug in it. Yeah, anyway, at least they kept it changed and they did inspect things, but if you can do it yourself, don't take it to those guys, because they're really just wham bam thank you ma'am, get it done, slam it together. It's not the top oil, you know, unless you ask for we actually go to Valvoline and oil change with that company I work for, so at least they use Valvoline, which is a decent oil. But it was just, you know, conventional cheap stuff, still better than most. But anyway, I just thought you guys might be interested. You can actually, I think this shows the date code. Where's that? Oh, there it is. Date code, it's 2010. See it right there. And the engine, 4.3. See it there. This gives you your air conditioning fill limits and all that stuff. Anyway, just thought you'd find it interesting that the truck was actually running good. I wish I had done a video before I started this, because it was running great. I was getting 16 miles to the gallon. So anyway, there you go.